About universities. How long have universities been around? It's an interesting question. Some people say they go back to Plato. That would be about 2,500 years ago. Or the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which also goes way back. But a lot of other people say, well, those were centers of learning, yes, but they weren't what we mean by universities. They were not places that created courses of study with defined areas that you have to learn, with an evaluation process that leaves a record, grading, that's called grading, with a process that gets you from individual courses into some program or other, that's called a degree, that leaves you at the end of it with a record of achievement that's measurable. That's kind of what universities do. You go back to about the late 1100s, and you find 3 universities in Europe that began doing that sort of thing at roughly the same time, in Bologna in Italy, in Paris, and in Oxford in England. So let's say, give or take, 1,000 years universities have been around. Universities are very expensive institutions. They cost a great deal of money to run, and the reason they are so expensive is that you cannot automate teacher-student engagement. Here's a good example of an alternative model. The U.S. Post Office is stuck because of its constitutional mandate with delivering mail in unprofitable amounts. At a time when UPS and FedEx cherry-pick most of the profitable mail. So they're stuck. It's a fiscal disaster. So some of the things that they've tried to do is say, well, we can automate zip coding, you know. So you create automated readers and you replace a bunch of people that would be there with a bundle of loose mail going, that goes up there, and it goes over. So you can save money and therefore time and therefore money about the reading of the barcodes on envelopes or zip codes. And then right now there's a debate saying we're terrible problems, but we can cut Saturdays if we can talk Congress into that. So there are things they can do. They have a terrible problem, and that is they have to deliver a piece of mail, a physical object, to down a gravel road to a little bitty post office someplace, and they have to run that kind of a system. There are economies that you can create, and they have done some of that. There are all kinds of economies in the way you make most manufactured products. But you can't do most of those if your business is to engage people in learning challenging, defined classwork and with legitimate and credible grading. That's labor intensive. It's never going to be not labor intensive. So why, here's the question, why has human society found it worth the money through 10 centuries to keep universities going? Why is that? Not all institutions last that long. Let me give you my current favorite example about a very good institution that lasted a long time. It had a very good run in this city, but it didn't last forever, and that's Hudson's Department Store. Hudson's Department Store was, in its day, the largest department store on earth. And it was the center of the cultural life of the city of Detroit. That's where people went in great numbers. That's where a lot of people, what in Philadelphia, the equivalent was Wanamaker's department store. There you would say, let's meet at the Eagle at 3 for coffee. The Eagle was a famous bronze eagle, still there, I think. Well, where did you meet at Hudson's? Let's meet at the Kearns Clock. So Hudson's Department, the Thanksgiving Day Parade, started by Hudson's, is the oldest Thanksgiving Day Parade in the country. Now, it's one of 2. The other one is in New York. Those are the 2, started the same year. And so a whole bunch of the life of the city flowed in and out of this enormous store that led to a whole lot of the life of a lot of people for a long time. Well, about 1993 or so, I was teaching a seminar here on, you had to do research on the city of Detroit. The seminar was on the city. You could pick any topic you wanted. You had to work in teams. You had to do primary source research. And one team decided they were going to study when the Lodge Expressway extended past 6 Mile, went up to 6 Mile originally. And then there was a debate at the time, which some of us older people might even remember. There were two alternative routes. The one that it's doing, it basically goes up James Cousins, heading north and west, pretty much right from 6 Mile. The other one went west on 6 Mile for 2 or 3 miles, and then went up north and west. So they had two. So they this team of two students wanted to see if they could find evidence that the choice of the route from 6 Mile up towards 8 Mile and beyond was related to the fact that Hudson's department store was anchoring the first serious shopping mall in the nation, namely Northland Shopping Mall. Interesting question. You see that? You see that? But it had to be primary source research. No Wikipedia for this stuff. This is a university, all right? Well, they found out that they couldn't find the archival records very easily, and the reason is they're in Minneapolis. They're not in Detroit. Why are they in Minneapolis? Well, because there is no Hudson's anymore. There's Dayton Hudson's, and the world headquarters are in Minneapolis. So they had a hard time. By the way, they never were able to find serious evidence that there was a collusion there, although there might have been, but they didn't have time to do the research. My point is this. This was an immensely powerful, hugely sophisticated, magnificent institution, Hudson's department store. It had a good run, too. It had about an 80-year run. And then, finally, we had to get that old building out of the way, and we had a spectacular controlled destruction of it. Why have universities lasted 1,000 years? There's a good question. Here is my answer. I think universities have proven worth the money in innumerable countries at this point. Now there are universities of this model pretty much all over the world, thousands of them. Why? I think it is this, and this is the heart of this little talk. Universities are the human alternative to settling disputes by warfare, bullying, manipulation, and torture. That's what they are. They are the alternative way for people to disagree about important matters with civility, with respect for people for whom you differ, with evidence rather than manipulation. That's what universities are about. They are the oases in society where people can debate and disagree about important things with what we call the rules of evidence and the rules of civility, and respect for people with whom you disagree. That's what universities are. That is why they are treasured. And if you were to imagine sort of magically removing all universities from everywhere where they exist, no universities anymore, what would replace the consistent commitment to debate and evidence? What would replace that? Well, we already pretty well know what replaces it. Civil wars. It doesn't have to be a big war to be a civil war. There are civil wars in every major city in America. They're called gang wars. They're territorial wars. So the alternative is right here all the time, and that is a different way of settling disputes. Domestic violence is an alternative to what universities do. When someone in a family in the inside their home settles disputes by beating somebody else up, terrorizing somebody in the home, that's an alternative way of disagreeing. Universities say this is dedicated to disagreement and debate about important matters using evidence, and good arguments, and respect for those who differ with you. That's what we do. That's what the noun is. That is what a university is. That is why we do it. And if you're not doing that, you should go sell peaches or something, but don't claim to be a university. That's the heart of the matter. Let me say a few more things about that. Let's see. I'm okay. This is about a half-hour talk. We're about halfway through it. I want to talk a little bit about the way universities organize their self-definition. Universities say, we do three things. We exist to do three things. To do peer-reviewed research, I'll talk about that for a little bit, to do teaching based on research, and teaching that is based on mentoring, and finally to do service. Those are the claims that universities make about what they do. Now, of course, they do a lot of other stuff. We, for example, had better have a decent budget process. Somebody in here is working on that. You know, if you don't have a decent budget, you go out of business. If follow me, so if you don't market well, you're going to go out of business. So I don't mean to say that universities don't do if you don't have a grounds crew, if you don't have a facilities department, if you don't have all those things, then you cannot be a university. But what universities do that makes them unique is peer-reviewed research, research-based teaching, mentoring teaching, and service. Let me talk about each one. For 15 years, I edited a scholarly journal in the history of technology. It came out 4 times a year. If you submit a manuscript to us, you would read our directions on the website, and it would say about 7,500 words, no more than 100 footnotes, not submitted elsewhere. There's certain things like that if you're going to submit a manuscript. The manuscript comes in, and the editorial team reads the manuscript and is asking, is this promising enough that we should put it into our refereeing process? If it's not, then I write a letter to the author being nice and saying whatever, but that we're not going to work with you. But if I say we will work with you, I then turn to our database, which has about 4,100 names in it right now, that you can sort according to the areas of expertise of about 4,000 people around the world. Depending on the manuscript, you want people who know about what that manuscript is writing about. So when a person sent us a manuscript a few years back about the Army Corps of Engineers trying to re-engineer the delta of the Mekong River during the Vietnam War, you need some referees that understand river engineering. Okay, that's one thing you better have. But you also better have some engineers that understand, some people that understand the history of Vietnam. And that turns out to mean they better understand the French colonial Vietnam and the transition from the French. So you need about 4 different angles of vision to read this thing so that you have people who know what they're talking about, who can then write a report to me, which I then interpret for the author. The author doesn't know who the referees are. The referees don't know who the author is. It's a lot of work. The referees get no pay and no recognition because they're anonymous. And a lot of referees do that and do it very well. It's a lot of work. I didn't realize how good those referee reports were until I became an editor. Well, all of that is so that if this manuscript is worth publishing, you can, at the end of the day, we usually do 2 or 3 rounds from the referees before it's finished. That what you've got at the end is a piece of research that you can bank on, that you aimed at getting it right. That's how you build bodies of knowledge in physics, in nursing, in law, in philosophy. You build bodies of knowledge across the world with these kinds of interactions, which are called peer-reviewed research. It's a lot of work. I spent a fair bit of my time as editor negotiating a coalition of 3 places in this part of the state. Our university here, the University of Michigan in Dearborn, and the Henry Ford Museum, to fund the operations of the office. because it's very labor-intensive intellectual work costs money. So we make a claim here, as do other universities, that our faculty do peer-reviewed research, which means they push to think through something or other that is original, no one has done it before, that is worth it. We always ask our referees to answer the so what question about a manuscript. It may be accurate, it may be new, but it may be silly. Why would you waste ink on that? So we claim that our faculty can do peer-reviewed research and have done it. But there's a little more to peer review than that. If you took that database of ours in my journals, the 4,100 names, and you search it, you can find how many of those people we like a lot as referees. And you can also find a few that we only asked once to be a referee, and we never asked them again, which means we didn't think much of that person's refereeing. So when you say your faculty, we have about 380 faculty members, I think, here at the university. When you say your faculty does peer-reviewed research, you don't just mean their own publication record. You also want to know how are they perceived in their discipline. Are they perceived to be smart and on top of things and knowing how to read someone else's work critically? That's another thing that you want. And the third thing a faculty member better be is what I expect my doctor to be. I don't want my doctor to be only treating patients. I want my doctor keeping up with the field. I don't want my doctor to not know that recent research says that the mix of this medicine here and this medicine here is a bad idea that wasn't known before. I don't want my doctor to be way out of date about stuff like that. That's also the claim we make about our faculty, that they read in their fields. So peer-reviewed research is a whole bunch of stuff, but when you think about it collectively, it is saying we have people here that think and think critically and are not stagnant and are interested in the human condition and pay attention to quality, not only their own, but the quality of other people in their field. That's what we claim. When I became dean, I realized that the grade grievance process, I didn't even think about the grade grievance process, but you need one because any student can file a grievance about a grade given by a professor. Then you better have a system in place that treats the professor in question with respect and the student in question with respect, and a way of adjudicating that whatever the grievance is. I think we would get about 6 of those maybe in a year, 10 maybe, and we give out thousands and thousands of grades. Does that mean that students like every grade they get? No, if you want some fun during finals week, walk around campus slowly, stroll around campus with your ears open, and listen to students talking to each other about their exams. And you'll find there's all kinds of complaining, not to say whining, saying, he never taught that, waving their arms, hollering, but not a lot of filing of grievances. Why is that? I think ultimately it comes down to this: the reputation of your faculty that they're good, and they're making judgment calls, and they are, on balance, reliable. What do students come to a university to get? They come to get a transcript. That's what they come to get. They come to get a record that's credible, that they have studied bodies of knowledge that are definable and identifiable in the public order, and that they have a measure of how well they achieved in that area. That's called a grade. And that whole system has integrity. So that when it's done, and you show that resume with a transcript to someone you want to work for, they believe it. The credibility of the grading system is the heart of what students are looking for. What do faculty look for students? They know they have to do the grading because that's what makes the whole thing work. But what they hope for is that students will be seduced while they're trying to get their grades to fall in love with thinking and with the world and with challenges and so that they stretch and they mature. That's what faculty want to have happen. And you know what? Both of those are good. You take away the grading system and its integrity, then, like I say, go sell peaches. Get out of the business. But it's not the whole deal. It is teaching students more about making demands about things that will stretch you intellectually or in your skill set? Or is it more about keeping you company in what is a highly uncertain, very demanding and exhausting process for students? What do students bring to class? They bring to class what we just talked about with each other and did a little bit of. They bring grief. They bring hangovers. They bring road rage from driving the freeway, and they bring terrible anxiety about a teenage child who's got drug paraphernalia in her underwear drawer, and you just found it. They bring their life to class. So you have in the engagement between faculty and students, you have on the one hand the precision that you hope for, the precision of a body of peer-reviewed research that grows and demands a lot of all of the faculty and then of the students. So you want that power, the intellectual power, but it's also a very human engagement. Faculty had better also know when to offer a bailout for a student so that they could start over when they mess something up. They better know when to mentor someone who's obviously worn down in an unusual fashion. That's all part of teaching. Part of it's making the demands and evaluating. Part of it is mentoring. But I would say a university ought to claim that the mentoring side of teaching is done by every single person who works here. That every person in this room teaches, mentors. That this is, campus security certainly teaches a lot, sometimes more on weekends than on other times. Budget office teaches a lot. Every single thing that you do is partly about the effort of working with people that we call students who hope to achieve a life. And they hope that it is not just a life for a job, but that it is bigger than that and deeper than that. That's what we do. Final thing. Very quickly. If you don't have a university that uses its resources, its intellectual skill set resources, to engage and improve its context, we call that the city. If you don't have that, then you have an ivory tower, which becomes an insulated place where your thinking begins to get funny. Because if you're doing your research and your teaching and all that with the assumption that nothing ever goes wrong because you've got a real nice bubble of a university, then that's bad thinking. So the claim that universities have is that they don't just do the teaching and the grading and the mentoring of students, they also take on the wide world. And the place where we do that the most, and I'll get you a copy of an out-of-date version of this, is in our clinics. I'm building a new version of it. It isn't quite done yet. But the version I have says that all the clinics that we have in all the different colleges that we have clinics in treat about 20,000 people in the course of a year. That's in law and dentistry and health clinics and psychology and counseling and architecture. That's a thing to brag about. It says, then when you get the precision of peer-reviewed research on this end, and the tough stuff in the world, which our clinics are running into all the time, and you put them together, you have a really exciting world.